everybody, welcome back to Auto Scholar with Mr. B. I'm Mr. B, and today we have our Project E30 in our shop because we're having an issue with it. We're having a problem with the coolant gauge reading improperly. So the problem that we are having is the gauge is bouncing around everywhere, and it seems to be temperature related to the temperature outside. It's very hot where I live right now. But I'm going to go through this car and I'm going to show you what to do if your temperature gauge isn't working, no matter how it's not working. So if your temperature gauge is either pegged out all the way, or if it's flat, if it's not reading accurate, or it's bouncing everywhere, we're going to cover all those problems, and I'm going to show you how to fix those here in this video. It's a very comprehensive video, and we start at the very basics and we work up to the more advanced problems these cars can have. So the coolant system on this car right here isn't the most reliable system on this car. We do have problems with overheating. We have problems with running a little bit hot, a little bit cold, depending on where you live. So making sure you have an accurate gauge reading of your coolant temperature is very important when you drive these cars. If your gauge isn't working properly, you can overheat the engine and possibly damage it. So definitely need to make sure that this is taken care of. So let's go over to the car. I'm going to show you where I start first, and then we're going to progress through the problems. I'm going to show you what I do with each problem. Okay, so the first thing, and this is just for any electrical diagnosis on any of these cars, is to make sure that your battery is fully charged and the connections and the cables and everything are clean. This is very, very important when it comes to sensors and readouts, because these sensors work off of resistance and it works off of having the proper voltage. So with this, make sure your battery's charged. If your battery's old, make sure that you get it tested. If you want to get a tester, this is a top-down BT100. It's about $60, and I use it over my Migtronics tester and a couple other testers that I have that are $100 more than this. Works really well. But make sure that all these ground connections right here are clean, tight, and don't have anything on them, not greasy or have any corrosion or anything on those. Make sure they're all good. That's just any electrical on any car. You need to make sure this is good. Some E30s have this in the trunk, so just make sure everything is tight in there. This happens to be a Touring, so it's up here. Wherever your battery is, make sure that you're getting a consistent 12 volts and you have good grounds and everything coming off of that battery, because that makes all the difference when it comes down to a lot of these electrical problems. Okay, so I have the car lifted up. If you have a jack and some jack stands, just make sure that you get this thing lifted up properly and securely. But the next thing we want to check, this is a problem area for E30s here. This is the ground cable that is going to the engine from the chassis right here. And you can see this one right here is starting to chip away. It's old, it's very stiff. And the bolts up here are rusty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this. You should be able to get just a standard battery cable. It doesn't matter if it's red or black, from your parts store, and it should be fairly cheap. So I'm going to go grab one of those, and then what we're going to do is we're going to clean up these points with either a brass or a iron brush or some sandpaper, and make sure that we're getting a good connection. This is a very important ground connection right here. If you have any starting and charging issues, this one's normally what's causing that, because the engine loses its ground, and this sensor that I'm talking about and what we're going to be talking about is grounded to the engine block. So if this is bad, this is just a bad highway back to the battery, and it can cause a lot of issues. Remember, this system kind of works off of resistance, so any extra resistance that we have is going to cause problems with our reading that can cause either a low or a high reading, or could even possibly cause it to flicker like I'm having. So we're going to go ahead and replace this and move on to the next step. Okay, so brand new ground cable, and I cleaned up all these points here. And I just went to O'Reilly's and I got this little 12-inch cable. It's actually a little bit longer than the factory one. It's SK8412SS. It's just a Super Start battery cable. It cost me like $9. And this is, again, just to make sure that you are 100% good on this ground. And so this is a failure point for a lot of circuits. And I don't think this really was causing the problem that I was having. I think the problem's more internal, but again, I'm gonna take y'all completely through this repair. Also, if you have a mechanical problem, like something with your radiator or something like that, and you're actually suffering from a temperature difference, this is the wrong video to watch for that. This is just for the electrical side for the gauge. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the car down and I'll take you and show you the sensor. Okay, here we are in my classroom and I have the wiring diagram pulled up here on my smart board, and this is off of ShopKey Pro. But this is the wiring diagram for the entire instrument cluster, but we're really only worried about the coolant temperature sensor side of things, okay? So here is my coolant temperature sensor right here mounted on the engine block. And so this is just a 1-pin connector, which I'll show you when we get out there. And it just goes directly to ground. It grounds against the engine block, which is why that wire that I just showed you in the last step was so important. We have to make sure that those grounds are good. So this wire is going to come all the way out here. It's going to be a brown and violet color. And it is going to go to this connector going into the instrument cluster. However, it makes a stop that's not shown in the wiring harness to the C101 connector. Okay, so we need to take that in mind because I'm going to show you the C101 connector and make sure that those pins are clean and straight in there as well. So this is going to come up here. A26 is going to be represented here in the wiring diagram. And this is going to go directly into the temp gauge, into the engine temp input, or pin 3 on the instrument cluster. So there's really not too much complication here outside the C101 connector that's on the firewall of the car. So you have a connection here, a connection at CO101, and a connection into the instrument cluster. And then the instrument cluster has an internal connection that's held on by a small, tiny little 7mm bolt. And once we get to that point, you'll see what I'm talking about there. But so this isn't very complicated. However, you know, because of the lack of complication, if anything goes wrong at all, this is going to go all out the window, which is what's happening on my car. So let me go ahead and take you out to the car, and I will show you exactly what we're talking about on the coolant sending unit here. Okay, here we are underneath the hood. I'm going to zoom in this area right here. I just wanted to zoom out a little bit so you can see where I'm coming from. But you will have a brown connector right here, and you just press this pin right here down and it'll come off, and you'll see your connector right here. You'll have a blue or a gray or a pink connector as well, and that will go to the sensor that sends the coolant signal to the DME or the engine control module. This does not have anything to do with your temperature readout on your dash, so don't worry about that. But this one right here, it'll have 1 pin in it. I have seen the brown ones black as well, so if you have a black one in here, as long as you unplug it and it has 1 pin coming out of it, this is what we're looking for. This is the sensor that is, a lot of times it will go bad and cause it, if it shorts out, it'll normally cause the temperature gauge to peg out, or if it you know, has too much resistance, it will cause the sensor to read too low. So this is a negative temperature coefficient, or an NTC thermistor sensor. So what is a thermistor? A thermistor changes resistance with temperature, and you have PTC, which will change positively, and NTC, which changes negatively. So as the resistance changes, when this engine's hot, the resistance goes down in this sensor. So how you can check is you can take that 1 pin inside there and put your alligator clip on it, and you can connect the other side to your negative battery cable, and you can check the resistance as the car is heating up, and the resistance should go down as the car is getting warmer, okay? And it's got a really funky range to it, which is why you have to change this. If you're going to like a set of video gauges or odometer gauges or anything like that, you've got to change the sensor out because it doesn't play well with other sensors. So with this right here, you just need to make sure that you have some amount of resistance going towards ground. If it's showing OL on your meter, that means that it is broken. If it's showing 0 resistance at all, that means it's shorted, okay? So if you see any of those, the sensor is bad and you need to replace it, which if you have any doubt on this sensor, the sensor's not that expensive. It's $20 or $30. You may want to go ahead and just put another one in there. Just make sure when you do that not to put anything on the threads, because again, it grounds on that thermostat housing, which is why, again, we needed that good ground cable underneath. Now let me show you the C101 connector, and I'll show you where it comes out at. So this goes directly to the C101, which is over there on the firewall next to the fuse box. Okay, so I have this separated right here, and you want to test this end right here. This is the engine side, this is the car side. Okay, and I have my trusty snap-on meter over here. You don't need anything this crazy. You can use any meter you need to. This isn't a really sensitive measurement here. And I have a pin going directly into my switch over here. In case you're confused on the colors, the yellow would be my positive over here, and my black, of course, my negative, but we're taking a resistance measurement, so it really doesn't matter. And so what I want to do here is I'm going to find pin 4, and pin 4 is right here. It does have numbers on it, and they're very, very, very hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to grab pin 4 here with my clamps, and then we're going to test the resistance. So set your meter up for resistance. And you see right here, I have, just very little resistance. It's probably just the moisture in the air. So this from here all the way out to the sensor is good. So if you're showing heavy resistance, or if your meter says OL out here, you have a cut in the wiring or something wrong with the pins going to that sensor, okay? So you definitely need to either lay an overlay in here or get another engine harness to fix that. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug this back. Well, before we close this back up, I want to clean these pins though. I'm not a big fan of this connector. Sometimes it gets water and corrosion in here. So what I do normally is I get some electronics cleaner, and I have a can over here. I use this CRC cleaner here, and I'm going to spray that out real good, and I have like a toothbrush that I use. You may want to go ahead and just blow it out with air afterwards. Either that or let it dry for a long time before you reconnect it. And again, I'm doing all this with the battery unplugged as well, so just keep that in mind as well. And so we're going to clean this up and reconnect it, and then we're going to go inside, because this problem is probably going to be in our instrument cluster, but I just wanted to check all the easy things to check first before we dive into ripping the cluster out of the car. Okay, so if everything is good up to this point, we're going to have to dig a little deeper, and this is why I do this in this order, because if you find a problem out there, it's a lot easier to handle than actually digging into the dash. So first thing I do when I'm getting these clusters out is go ahead and remove the steering wheel. Either remove your emblem or your horn pad underneath there, and you will have a 7/8, or I believe it's a 22 nut back there. Before you remove this steering wheel, definitely mark it so you can put it on in the right orientation. That way you don't have to go get alignment or have to take the steering wheel on and off to get it straight again. So I just take a marker or a punch or something, and I line this up to make sure it goes back on the exact same spline. So once you get your steering wheel off, you'll have your little screws here that come out to keep this panel in. You have one there, they just turn. You can do it normally with your fingernails if they're long enough, like mine are. If you've got a tool ring, you got to deal with this too, but normally I just drop this down just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to reach up in there, and we're going to go behind this panel. It has 2 thumb screws right in this area here. I'm going to reach up behind there and twist those thumb screws off. And this is where that panel was, and right here is where the thumb screws are. So you're just going to reach up back there and undo those, and that'll just pop right off. You just got to be gentle with it. It does have these little clips that kind of go in here. Just be very gentle. These are kind of fragile, but they're pretty common. You can pretty much find them on eBay and stuff if you end up breaking it. And after that, we have our 2 screws that are up here, the little tiny Phillips head screws. Don't lose them because they're kind of a weird size. And you have 2 screws right here and one right there. And you're going to take those out, and this whole bezel is going to come out, and then we can get at the instrument panel. And I forgot there is 2 more screws back there as well. After you get that surround out, there is a Phillips head screw there. And just as a caution here, these little tabs right here are extremely fragile. So they do make repair kits if you break them, but just if they're not broken, please be careful, because if you put them back in and they're cracked, this thing will rattle, and it'll be loose in there. So just be very careful when you're taking these out. Make sure that you just gently bend them down when you're pulling this out. And then you're going to lay this out and you're going to disconnect everything in the back. Here's another tip. Go ahead and get you one of your microfiber cloths and put over your instrument, your steering column, excuse me. And because you got to kind of slide this over. So you have these right here and you have to pull these tabs out. And I'm not going to be able to do this one-handed, but these little black tabs slide out. Just get your screwdriver and pop them loose. You got one there and you've got one there and you've got a yellow one back there, and just pop that little black tab up. You just want to gently pry it, and then that should come loose, that should come loose, and the yellow one should come loose. And then we'll meet in the classroom and I'll show you what we're doing next. Okay, so here is the instrument cluster here, and our gas gauge is going to be right here, and our coolant gauge is going to be right here. And you may want to, while you're in here, take a look at the gas gauge as well, because it kind of suffers from the same kind of problems the coolant gauge does. So these are the grounding nuts right here, and they're 7mm. And a lot of times these will loosen up, and these to me don't seem that loose. They're pretty much hand tight from the factory. But you want to check, there should be a washer underneath here. And that washer needs to be present as well for this to ground. And a lot of these are brass. This one seems to be just a regular steel one. We're going to take this off right here and put these off to the side. And we have these screws over here. If they look like this, they need to come off. And so we're going to separate the front from this blue piece here and pull this out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this apart here, and gently slide this out. And we're going to get this out of the way. Now is a really good time to polish this glass if it's got scratch in it. And if you have to change your SI board batteries or any LEDs in here, or you want to do any gauge overlays, anything like that, this is a really good time to do it since you have everything out. So we've already taken the nuts off the back of here. So now what we want to do is we want to just pull this out, and this is where the gauge takes the inputs at. This is the ground, okay? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to clean this up right here. And so you can take some Scotch-Brite pad or a little wire brush. We're going to clean this up and make sure that all of our connections are good and tight. Make sure that the solders and everything in here are still okay. And I'm going to do this with the fuel gauge as well, just simply because it's out. This is a really good time to just take care of anything, odometer gears, SI batteries, anything like that when you have this out, because it's kind of a pain in the butt to get out. So you can also send these off and get them rebuilt fairly inexpensively, you know, $200–300 or so. And they'll just resolder everything, change your batteries out, all that jazz. So you'll just, you know, of course, not be able to drive the car too much while you're doing that. So I'm going to get this cleaned up, and I'm going to inspect this for any type of damage or any type of corrosion in here, and then we'll put it back together. And hopefully that will fix the problem. If you're not seeing an obvious problem, it could be that the actual gauge itself is faulty. And again, these are all over eBay. And of course, you can take one from another instrument cluster if you like. And I don't know if there's any difference between them, all the different ones, but I haven't. They all look the same to me, and I've had 6 of these, and I've had, you know, 2.7 ETAs and everything else. So But the main thing is just to get this really good and cleaned up and put it back together and then retest after this. So if you see anything suspect, go ahead and change it. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys what I found here. This is the mounting point here for the gas gauge, and here is for the coolant gauge. And this area right here is pretty worn. I don't have a macro lens, so it's really hard to see, but it looks kind of corroded and worn. So I'm gonna clean this up, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run a little bead of really thin solder in here, and it's going to build this area up. That way the gauge fits a little tighter in there, and hopefully that will fix my issue. And if you look at the back of the gauge, this is where that bolts up to. I'm gonna clean this area up here, and then we'll bolt it back up, reinstall the cluster, and hopefully that will fix the problem. If it doesn't fix the problem is actually probably in this gauge here, and so we'll get another one of those and install. But other than that, this is a pretty simple repair, and so you're just going to, I'm gonna do this solder real quick, build it up, and I'm gonna show you what I'm doing before I put it back together. So what I'm doing is I've melted a little bit of solder here, and I'm just running that bead all the way around. And I just got a little cheap solder gun doing this. And I got some really thin solder right here. And so I'm just gonna make a ring around here. And I'm gonna do on the other side over here for the fuel gauge as well. And so I got this about halfway done, but I just wanted to kind of show you the process of doing this. You don't want to glob it on too thick. You just want a nice little buildup, and this is going to sandwich in there in between that gauge, and it should work good. Okay, so the wiring on pin 4 here is going to go into the car to the instrument cluster, and it is going to go to this blue wiring connector right here. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because depending on what year car you have is how this is going to come into the cluster. So if you've got an older vehicle, I believe this is going to come into the pin 26 here. If you look at my sheet here printed off from a forum, my car is saying, my car's a 92, is saying that it's pin 17 is the coolant temperature sensor ground, and 18 is the signal coming in. So the pin 18 would be coming from pin 4 on my C101 plug. But you come over here to this blue plug, and there is absolutely no numbers on it or on the instrument cluster, and I cannot find a pinout. So you're just gonna have to count these and figure out how many other ways you can get to those pin numbers and ohm those out to see if that where your problem is. Now the good thing is I've never seen a problem between here and the pin on 101. So it's pretty rare to have a problem here. Normally your problem is going to be outside on the engine side of stuff, either your sensor or a bad ground, or it's going to be inside your instrument cluster, which we talked about. So, but there is also, you know, a possibility of this going bad. So that's just a little information in case you need it. If you've done everything else and you've come to this point and it still doesn't work, then your problem's going to be here. A lot of this has been process of elimination and going from the, you know, most common to least common things, or the least intrusive to the most intrusive thing. So I've tried to do my best with this video, and hopefully at the end of this video, you guys would have fixed your problem. Okay, viewers, so hopefully that helped you with your situations you're having with your temperature gauge. Again, it's very important to have one of these gauges and have them working, because this is going to give you the first line of defense for stopping engine damage before it starts. It's going to show anything that's going wrong with the cooling system. And if your temperature is going up, definitely need to look into it, because these engines do not take high temperatures well. They blow head gaskets, warp heads, crack blocks. I've seen it all on these cars. They are very fragile when it comes to temperature. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And also, I am on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, VK. I have a lot of content there that I can't really post here, so follow me over there, MasterTech Mr. B, or Auto Scholar Mr. B on those platforms as well. And we'll see you next time on Auto Scholar Mr. B.